Hi, this is Jeff Helgeson, speaking from Heirloom Books at 6239 North Clark Street, Chicago, Illinois. Continuing a discussion of analytic reading with respect to creative literature, and before undertaking the topic of classical mythology, I'd like to summarize the approach I've previously described in terms of the consideration of a work as an artifact from the perspectives of context, content, and craft. Context: when a work was written, by whom, if the information is available, and under what circumstances, historical, cultural, and economic, as well as the gender, age, and overall life situation of the writer. Content: what a piece of work specifically says. Craft: the structural organization and style or way in which language is used within a piece. In addition to these factors, I've also suggested that readers consistently ask themselves four questions: what, why, how, and so what. In other words, what does the text say? What characters, places, and events are represented, as well as what internal patterns of details may become evident as repetitions and variations, in addition to what allusions to other texts or historical and cultural details are included. Why would a work say what it says? What are the possible logical reasons for the selection and arrangement of details? How is it said? The structure and style of expression. And so what? Or what significance does the content seem to have in terms of human experience? Now, addressing that last question, I'd suggest at least two levels. Manifest, the things represented on a literal level, and latent, implied attitudes or ideas, whether moral, psychological, or symbolic. So that's it. A Rubik cube of literary interpretation. Context, content, craft, what, why, how, so what, the selective inclusion of details containing patterns of internal references and external allusions. Literal or manifest, and latent, moral, psychological, or symbolic levels of expression. Clearly, not all of this is in every piece of writing, but it's always possible. And it's up to the reader to make the determination. With regard to the application of this approach to my declared topic of classical mythology, the first thing I would like to address is the misconception that myth is comprised of meaningless fabrications having no basis in reality. Quite to the contrary. Mythology generally is the expression of either an understanding about how the real world came to be the way that it is, or about the unseen forces which perpetually influence human experience. That's what Hindu, ancient Egyptian, and Hebraic texts were designed to do, and it's what myth everywhere has always done and continues to do. Behind the logic of myth are principles of animism, the belief that all things have living souls, which is why people knock wood to invoke the support of a tree's spirit for their spoken intentions. And personification, the representation of an abstraction in human form. That, at least, is the broad basis of mythology. It's Lord Brahma as Hindu life force, and it's the spirit which moved upon the face of the waters and commanded, "Let there be light." With regard to classical mythology, as defined as the ancient narratives of Greece and Rome, Edith Hamilton, in the introduction to her comprehensive survey of the subject, states, unlike the mythos of earlier cultures, during 1,000 years of an oral tradition before the writings of Hesiod, Pindar, and Homer, the Greeks made their gods in their own image. That had not entered the mind of man before. Until then, gods had no semblance of reality. Or, as observed by Pythagoras of Abdera, for the ancient Greeks, of all things man is the measure. This humanism is what Hamilton described as the miracle of Greek mythology. Even the most fantastic events, she observed, take place in a world which is essentially rational and matter-of-fact. And it's this practicality that consistently is evident, as described by Thomas Bulfinch in The Age of Fable. Before earth and heaven were created, all things wore one aspect: chaos, a confused and shapeless mass that eventually separated by weight. The fiery part, being the lightest, sprang up and formed the skies. The air was next in weight and place. The earth, being heavier, sank below, and water took the lowest place. The earth was then personified as Gaia, or Mother Earth, and she and the sky, Uranus, produced a race of giants called the Titans. Feeling hostility towards his offspring, as his father sometimes seemed to do, Uranus imprisoned them in their mother's womb, causing Gaia to recruit the youngest, Cronus, to castrate his father and throw his genitals into the sea, making a white foam out of which the goddess of beauty and love, Aphrodite, or Venus, is said to have emerged. Cronus then became ruler of the universe, marrying his sister, Rhea, but fearing a similar fate to that of his father, he began devouring his own children as soon as they were born. That is, until his wife tricked him by giving him a large stone wrapped in swaddling clothes to eat instead of their youngest son, Zeus, or Jupiter in the Roman version. He was then raised in secret on the island of Crete, eventually giving Cronus a drink that caused him to vomit up his other children, two of whom came together with Zeus to kill their father and then divide the world among them. Zeus, or Jupiter, taking the sky, Poseidon, or Neptune, taking the sea, and Hades, or Pluto, becoming the ruler of the underworld. Their sister, Ceres, or Demeter, became the goddess of vegetation, bringing fertility from Mother Earth. Zeus then married another sister, Hera, a third sister becoming the virgin goddess Hesta. Zeus also gave birth on his own to his daughter Athena, who sprang full-grown and in armor from her father's head. Zeus then conceived Apollo, the sun, and his twin sister, Artemis, or Diana, the virgin goddess of the moon and the hunt, with Leto, a daughter of one of the Titans. Later conceiving Mercury, the winged-footed messenger of the gods we still see on FTD florist trucks, with the daughter of one of the other Titans, Atlas, who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and Ares, or Mars, the god of war, with his wife, Hera, as well as Vulcan, the god of fire, making up the 12 Olympians, and probably not so coincidentally, creating a correspondence with the number of lunar months within a year and signs of the zodiac, the progression of their corresponding constellations, predicting the sequence of the seasons, and creating a clear parallel on earth as it is in heaven. The Olympian gods, subsequently, also had their own offspring, including such familiar figures as Cupid or Eros, the 9 muse of art and history, Pan, the half-goat flute-playing in fear or panic-provoking god of the wilderness, and the god of wine, Dionysus or Bacchus. Using a general approach to things, on a literal level, for example, the various amorous escapades of Zeus and his wife Hera's jealousy serve as a kind of ongoing comic series of adventures, with the god transforming himself into several different forms, such as a bull, a shower of gold, a fog, and a swan, in order to satisfy his extramarital sexual desires. These stories are amusements within themselves that offer entertainment. On a moral level, however, what other myths provide can be seen as significant understandings regarding different types of human behavior. Among these is the story of Tantalus. He had been the only mortal child of Zeus allowed to eat with the gods, and in return he invited them to dine with him, in their honor, presumably, having his own son killed and served in the meal, which the gods refused, punishing Tantalus by placing him for eternity within sight of food and water which he could never obtain. In essence, like with the story of Abraham's son Isaac in the biblical text, what this suggests is a moral rejection of human sacrifice, a practice that Sir James Frazer in his encyclopedic work The Golden Bough has demonstrated had been widely followed throughout the Middle East and continued in Northern Europe for another 2,000 years, and in the Western Hemisphere an additional 1,000 years after that. On a psychological level, myth, as observed by both Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, as well as such literary critics as Northrop Frye, continually relates the basic instincts of the human species, the Oedipal and Electra complexes being only the most familiar examples. In fact, John A. Johnson from Pennsylvania State University in a 2017 Psychology Today article asserted, "Myth provides enough insight about the world to help us navigate life's journey," or as Ayrton Artaud in The Theater and Its Double states, "Every day, love, personal ambition, struggles for status, all have value only in proportion to their relation to the terrible lyricism of the myths to which the great mass of men have assented." Finally, on a symbolic level, Ernst Cassirer, in his book Language and Myth, has stated, "The mythical form of conception is not something superadded to certain definite elements of empirical experience. Instead, the primary experience itself is steeped in the imagery of myth and saturated with its atmosphere." In other words, classical mythology represents the essence of consciousness since before the collapse of Minoan civilization on the island of Crete sometime around 3,400 years ago. Evidence of this historic context is suggested by a story in which Athens had been forced to send an annual tribute of 7 young men and 7 maidens to be devoured by the half-man, half-bull son of Poseidon, imprisoned in a great labyrinth on Crete built by the artisan Daedalus, whose name James Joyce used for his own autobiographical figure in both A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and his early 20th century Odyssey, Ulysses. Then, the son of the king of Athens, Theseus, who, like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Parsifal in the Arthurian legends, and even Jesus, was raised separate from his father, took on the dangerous task of confronting the dark side. And with the aid of a young woman, the king of Crete's daughter, Ariadne, who promises him to help if he'll marry her, Theseus succeeds in killing the monster and ending Minoan domination. Then, either he abandons Ariadne or she dies, depending on which version of the story someone decides to accept. But the young god of wine, Dionysus, places her crown in the sky as a consolation. Now, you throw in the creation of animals and mankind by the Titan Epimetheus, the stealing of fire from the sun by his brother Prometheus to empower human beings, and his eternal punishment for this crime, along with the gift of the gods to Epimetheus of a bride named Pandora, and her forbidden opening of a box containing all the evils in the world, in addition to the stories of the abduction of Ceres' daughter, Persephone, by her uncle, Hades, the god of the underworld, subsequently coming to spend half of the year with him as the queen of the land of the dead, Narcissus and Echo, Perseus and Medusa, Pegasus, the flying horse, the 12 labors of Hercules, as well as the adventures of Jason and the Argonauts, ending with that hero's female helpmate, Medea, after feeling set aside for another woman, killing their children, something which tragically is still occasionally reported in the news. And you have a matrix for the many illusions that populate both Western literature and visual art. But please, for God's sake, don't just read classical myths for the rich warehouse of illusions contained in other works. Read them for the pure joy of the experience. You see, ultimately what's related in myth is really a vision of reality, whether with regard to the material world, human psychology, or legendary events. It was these factors that provided the archetypal images presented in mythology, which either reappear in other pieces of writing as a result of intentional selective inclusion, or simply recur spontaneously because of the overall continuity of the human condition. I mean, the sun, Apollo, still appears to emerge in the east, chasing Daphne, a name which Cassier has observed is derived from the term meaning the redness of dawn, crosses the sky and descends in the west. The moon, Apollo's virgin sister, still progresses to a 28-day cycle before falling into the Earth's shadow and re-emerging after a night's total absence in a phenomenological death and resurrection over a period of 3 days. The seasons still change in a predictable cycle, producing fall, winter, spring, and summer, as the goddess Ceres mourns the loss and celebrates the return of her daughter from the underworld. The constellations that the ancients looked up to see still populate the night sky, and the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, still gaze down upon each of us here on Earth every day. Also, the pattern of quest established in the story of Jason and the first generation of human heroes that Joseph Campbell termed the monomyth continues to unfold as it always has done, to call to action, a rejection of the call, acceptance, the encountering and overcoming of obstacles, the obtaining of a reward for these efforts, and a return to the place of departure. People live that every day when the alarm clock goes off and the snooze button is hit, and then the day is begun with a baptismal shower leading to interactions with the strange characters of the workplace, and a return home with the reward of a day's pay. The patterns of myth, it might be said, truly are the fabric of our lives. With respect to books that can help make these stories available, I'm generally torn among the choices offered by Robert Graves' The Greek Myths, Edith Hamilton's Mythology, The Age of Fable by Thomas Bulfinch, Mythos by Stephen Fry, Matt Clayton's Mythology, as well as The Metamorphosis of Ovid. My recommendation, you decide. Next time, my hope is to briefly sketch out the sequence of narratives surrounding the story of the Trojan War. Heirloom Books is located at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois, and it's open from 1 in the afternoon until 7 in the evening, 7 days a week.